Good
Wow.
morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We're going to get started, but before we do, I just want everyone to check in the chat box so we can see who's here. I'm asking you to share your name and your role in your community, and then what are 3 words to describe your energy and intention for this morning? So just check in the chat box. It's good to see everyone. Good morning. And I'm going to turn it over to Amarjeet. She's going to get us started.
Oh, Atamarie, I'm just going to share my screen and, as Dominique said, get us started. So welcome to this second webinar stroke meeting on collective action for communities. We've got a good lineup today and sharing more in terms of collective impact, but also some really good on the ground learnings from Dr. Andrew Miller from Northland. And let me just start with karakia. So please join me. Tutawa mai ironga, tutawa mai iraro, tutawa mai iwaho, tutawa mai iroto, kia tau ai, te mauri tu, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, homie, huie,
Yeah.
Before we get into just the introductions, just a reminder, this is, as I say, the second in the series on collective impact. We do have the recording that has been issued from our previous meeting last week, and that is there and available on our website. And then we have a follow-on from this session on the 3rd of June, which will go in depth into case study around Ora Connect. But in terms of introductions, let's get into some whanaungatanga. I'll stop sharing my screen. And if everyone's happy, I will start and then we'll introduce our panel. Ko Tararoa te monga, ko Waikanai te awa, I tipu ake aho I Gateshead, England, ko Wayne Maxwell takutane no Wararapa ai, ko Flynn Rua ko Tara, ko Tara oku tamariki, ko Amajit Maxwell aho, tina koto, tina tato kato. Thank you. And I would like to introduce our panel. We have Paul Smits and Dominique Samari coming at you from Milwaukee. So yesterday, as Paul keeps reminding us, and they are both working in the collective impact space, and as you would have seen last week, provided that real introduction around that. We also have Dr. Andrew Miller and Claudia Johns and Fire Merle as our 2 consumer representatives. But what I'll do is I'll hand over so they can introduce themselves, and we will start with Paul.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Schmitz. I'm a senior advisor with the Collective Impact Forum and lead a consulting group called Leading Inside Out, and have been working with collective impact efforts around the US, around the world for the last 7 years, including 2 visits I've made to New Zealand before to work with groups in various cities. And I'm here with my colleague, Dominique Samari, who is right there.
Good morning, everyone. Dominique Samari. I am partner at P3 Development Group, a firm also based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I partner and collaborate with Paul often on projects all over. I'm a recovering attorney and focus on work designing programs, initiatives, and strategies that center equity and inclusion. And I'm super excited to be here with you guys this morning.
Oh, Andrew.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Andrew Miller. I'm a GP up in Whangarei, and my presentation today is around when I was the chair of Manaia PHO, which wound up to form Mahite Hauora up in Northland. So I'm going to talk to you a little about the research that came out of that and some of the lessons we learned. I'm also, I guess, in any meeting I come to, a consumer. I've been a consumer on the National Head and Neck Cancer work stream, and I always come to this from what it's like to be the end user of the health system. So hi.
Kia ora, Andrew. Fire Merle.
Ai, atamari e koutou katoa. Ko taku nei pepeha. I would like to introduce myself the way that Armajit did. Kia ora mai, ko mā tātua te waka, ko tama whariu te marae, ko mā tātua aroha mai, ko ure tara te awa, ko ngai tama whariu te hapu, ko ngai te rangi te iwi, ko wai au, ko Merle Mapuna Samuels, tuku ingoa. Atamari e nau mai hara mai. Kia ora,
Kia ora,
Richard.
Ma. Claudia, welcome.
Thank you. Morena koutou. My name is Claudia. I deliberately am not sharing my pepeha because as urban disconnected Maori, I this week found a new family member who can actually fill in the second half of it. And now that I know it's present for me and don't quite have access yet, I feel it would actually not be appropriate to share one half of my whānau and not the other. But I can tell you I live in the beautiful Kerikeri in the Bay of Islands, very near where my whenua is. And I'm absolutely committed to the appropriate engagement to get around equity issues because my life trajectory has been severely impacted by the inequity in New Zealand. And I think that it's absolutely possible to overcome. And I want to make sure that nobody else goes on that trajectory. So kia ora and thank you all very much for having me.
Kia ora, Claudia. Paul, I'll hand over to you to run the session. Thank you and welcome everybody. Great to see you.
Thanks everyone. And our really the for those of you interested, last week, if you weren't here, we did a full-on kind of introduction to what collective impact is. And there's a recording of that and the slides of that available for those who'd like to learn it. We are recording this session as well to share. Our results today really are to understand best practices and lessons on collective impact with some examples from New Zealand. And also to kind of highlight perspectives on consumer engagement and community engagement as part of that. And so we're going to have a couple stories. What we'd like to do to start is just to warm us up and get us thinking about this stuff is we find doing collective collaborative work is really hard. And that lots of people have been in collaborations that haven't worked. And so what we'd like you to do is to use the chat right now. And we'd like you in the chat to list, if you could think about, if you are trying to design the worst team possible, a team that you know you would set up for failure, what would you put in place to ensure it did not succeed? So it kind of comes backward, but think about what is it you would put in place to make sure that a team didn't succeed? What are the things that you would make as rules for it to make sure it didn't? What makes teams fail? And you can type your answers into the chat. A terrible leader who dictates everything. That's a great one. Misaligned goals. Poor communication. No communication. Silos. Self-interest, lack of communication, dictations without context, a lot of lack of communication, leader only and no face-to-face, different agendas, no vision, lack of leadership, no goals, power struggles, you guys are good at this. So I always like to enter with that question because we all have examples. We all know what doesn't work. And so what we've been trying to figure out in our journey on this and in the community building work I did for 20 years before is really how to make it work. What do we put in place to prevent these things from happening, from taking over, for these things to kind of drive us back? And so our hope today is last week we shared with you some of our perspective on how this works. Today, Andrew from the Primary Health Organization in Northland that he chaired is going to share the examples and lessons they experience up there doing collective work, and then Dominique and I will kind of respond to that and share, kind of connect that to what we talked about last week. And then we're going to invite you to have a conversation. We're going to break you up into groups and then we'll come back. And then Meryl and Claudia will share about consumer engagement, which is a key part to any effort. You really can't get to collective impact with just organizations and institutions without people. And so we're really excited to have their perspectives as well and the chance to engage with all of you. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Andrew. And he's going to talk about the Northland experience, which Dominique and I loved and found very much in line with the lessons we shared last week that we found in our work.
Thanks, Paul. Just as a way of background, I'm going to just really tell you a story about what happened up in Northland as we created Mahite Hauora. The story I'm going to relate actually is on the back of some research done by Auckland University. So this is a fairly rich story around how hard change and transformation can be, what you're almost always guaranteed to bump into, and maybe some of the things that we should have known before we started. So I'm going to talk about the collaboration kaupapa. That was the process in the group that helped form Mahite. A little bit about why we did it, what we did, what we learned out of it. And I think it's really relevant. We've now got the Health and Disability Review telling us that they like to have community-led Tier 1 services. And that was our aspiration. And it was a long process. It took us 3 or 4 years to get to the point where we finally had got to a place where we could move from a stronger platform. I think it's also important, we got a driver from health and disability. We also had a couple of things that happened up in Northland about 6 or 7 years ago that pushed us into this before the rest of the country started. We probably almost started too soon because some of the resourcing still remains a problem. But about 6 years ago, a Auckland-based PHO came into Northland telling us that we're going to take 3 practices out. The DHB's response to that, and also the PHO's responses, we didn't think that was a great idea. But the DHB thought then maybe to stop that, they'd have a policy of only allowing 1 PHO in Northland, which was met with major resistance from the 2 PHO boards who, as autonomous organisations, didn't feel that was a good way of consulting, but also realised that we probably had so much that we shared in Northland between the 2 organisations that rather than sit in the getting done to, it actually hop into the driver's seat of this. So we got an organisation called Navigator, who were our facilitators, mediators and relationship builders. We also got some seed funding from Treasury, who saw this as a better public service process, and we started having meetings between the 2 PHO boards. At any point, the Treasury had said, if it can't go any further, you get a stop-go point, this falls apart, fine. They didn't actually say you have to get to the end of it. They were just funded as we went. Became really apparent almost immediately that we were aligned in our vision and principles, but also that we would need the DHB alongside us. And so very early on, we got what we call the 3rd leg of the stool, which is DHB and the 2 PHOs working together. Observed also by in Northland as this seemed to be working, that Te Kahua Tānui, who are the iwi leaders group, joined us, and so then we had a 4-legged chair or a table, which is sort of quite apt because we've set ourselves in a really strong platform. So that's the sort of the background to it. We weren't intending to form a giant PHO. This was not meant to be business as usual. This was going to be a new way of doing things collaboratively from the ground up, starting with communities in whānau and working back. So Heather Simpson, during her work on the review, spent a lot of time in Northland looking at what we were doing. And if you read the Health and Disability Review, it would actually look on paper a lot like what we were trying to do up in Northland. So that's the background. So I hope that what I go through today will actually give you some ideas. This is not a straightforward thing. This is, dare I say, slightly painful and confusing at times. So a kaupapa has a number of meanings. It's a purpose or plan. It's a platform, a raft, or a body of a cloak. So again, very apt to what we were trying to do. And we were trying to set up principles and to guide this, which was sustain while we were doing it, direct attention to why we had to keep going when things were tough, work out how to proceed when it wasn't clear, and hold people to what matters the most. Simply after the first meeting, that was our vision and our values. And I think if you look at those, not many people could argue that those weren't the right things to be doing. Right through the process though, when people were coming back to thinking this wasn't the right thing for them or their organisation, particularly, we'd refer back to the visions and values and say, so you don't think that self-determined well-being or equity or transparency or compelled, collaborative leadership's right? And at that point, people would often realise that they'd slipped slightly and were going off track. So those are pretty simple visions and values, and that's where we started. Very early on in the process, we got approached by Auckland University by Bridget, Krista and Jennifer. They are professors down in Auckland. They wanted to find out what we were doing. They come from different schools down there. See, Bridget's from business, we got Krista from social work, and Jennifer's political scientist. They came up and talked to us during the kaupapa work, all of us separately and in groups, to talk about what we were doing, why we were doing, and how we were feeling about it. It was a narrative, it was just storytelling. They were very interested just in the story. And they took that away and came up with a bit of research, which is what I'm about to present you, which when they first presented to us, looked slightly confusing because it was about paradoxes. And I think this is really important because when we all go into our attempt to form tier 1 organisations, there's going to be tensions all over the place, which you need to be aware of and normal. It's going to be painful, it's going to be awkward, it's going to be difficult conversations, but you've got to have them if you want to move. So I'm going to talk to you about their research. So that's what I've just said, that we've got to sustain these paradoxes, and we had to find ways through it. And they flourish. These sort of things flourish when you've got something that's really complex. We had lots of different entities trying to engage. We were trying to break the status quo in business as usual. We knew it wasn't going to be a straight line. It was going to be ups and downs. We also had no certainty of resource policy or mandate. We were doing this in a bit of a void. Ministry of Health refused to support us. The Social Investment Agency were about to fund our further progress, but then there was an election and Labor won and National lost, and that went sideways. In the end, we funded it out of our own reserves, which did give us a sense of ownership, I guess. And we're aiming for the long run here. Even short-term things are not going to work, and there's going to be times where we had to pause, and we still are at times finding pauses in our progress. And there was going to be things that changed. There was a distribution of power and voice. We still, I don't believe, have the power of voice actually in the right place. Our final goal is to pass power and voice into communities, into whānau, into localities, and work back from what we hear, what matters to whānau. So we're not there yet. I think we've set a platform. The kaupapa was a platform. The next block of work is to flip the model upside down and go back to find what people want. And I think all of us should be trying to think of doing that as we roll into the community work we've been advised is what the ministry wants us to do. So paradox 1, there's 2 things to this. One of them is we had unchanging things that we all agreed were not negotiable, that were the backbone of what we wanted to do. But to do that, we'd have to change our path of how we got there. The things that we thought were unchanging were things that none of us would probably argue, which is that we need to be patient and whānau-led. Te tiriti is in the heart of what we do, and that we wanted equity. The other pinnacle, I guess, was that we have organisations, there's a bunch of acronyms in health, and they see themselves as pinnacles, and they see themselves as rocks, and they see themselves as unmovable. And we realise that everything can move, and unless they move, we're back to business as usual, making no progress. So some people would have to let go of some of the stuff and actually jump into the tide and actually swim a bit. This happened quite a bit. There was a bit of this climbing up further and turning back. What I mean by that is that those within the collaboration kaupapa are often thinking quite a way ahead of others that were listening quietly or following or taking part. So at times you actually had to stop, take a pause, wait for people to climb up to where we were, or actually turn back and go back to where they were. Let everyone take a breath and then start moving again. We had this happen frequently, that we almost lost sight. particularly Lynette Stewart and I, and the guy from our navigator, were at times, because we were talking to each other up to 10 or 12 hours a week, were barreling along in our own little world, and then having to come back and catch everyone back up. Paradox 3, which is we had a process to take, which had to be at times quite methodical, and that on the other side also required a little bit of us making meaning of what we're trying to do. When you see these slides, most of the things on the left-hand side of the screen, or the top thing I mentioned, had to move a little bit more to the right. So we did have to have a good process, but we also had to make meaning of what we were trying to do, which is a paradox. Another paradox was that we had to build trust with each other, but actually seek some conflict. There was a fair bit of raro about the time around the table at times. Particularly when we started, we were really mistrustful for nothing more than we just hadn't sat down for long enough to talk to each other. And when it became apparent that our visions and principles were aligned, things became easier. But we did at times have to, particularly when new people came on board, listen to what they say, but we actually at times had to step them out a wee bit about what they were saying was not to do with so much as more to do with their process or their pinnacle, their own pinnacle, than actually trying to move. So expect this to happen. Expect that building trust actually requires conflict. Sounds paradoxical. There you go. Letting go and holding on. You know, we had to realize that people do want to hold on to what they've got, but to make progress, you actually have to let some stuff go. Particularly for my GP colleagues, we, in the formation of Maite, we had a Manaia PHO, which I was the chair of, was co-owned by Māori providers in general practice. So in creating Maite, the GPs of Northland gave up their governance role, gave up their shareholding, gave up all their assets to the trust. That's not an inconsiderable thing to do. And when you pass that level of trust to someone else, you really want it to be held. I mean, personally, I was very interested in what we were doing, but in that, I also gave up my role as chair of a company I'd been involved with for 18 years. And in doing so, I also took a leap of faith that all my staff that were my responsibility as a chair of a company would be looked after. And that was quite a scary proposition. And how do you respond to these paradoxes? I mean, we had I known, you know, some of the stuff I've just shown you, then I wouldn't have been so, I guess, so tense and you know, worried that these shouldn't be resolved. They're not even to be eliminated. They're actually what makes growth occur. So when we're going through these processes, embrace and sustain it. You've just got to realize that's a normal part of what you're doing. We also saw the paradoxes shift in intensity. So you often found that any part of the process, some things were nice and stable and others were quite wound up. And I said, managing this sort of risk over time is really, or this process is us shifting to the right, you know, jumping from pinnacles to change, jumping from process to meaning, all those things that actually move you. And so there are contradictions, it's complex, but you will get movement. Oops, wrong way. So what do we learn? So this is from the researchers. So what I've just shown you is nothing that we, as the collaboration co-op, have come up with. These lessons were taken out of our narrative, our story, by the professors that I had said had done the research. So this is what they think we have learned out of it. So developing this co-op early and using, you know, anchoring conversations around meaning and around vision and principles really early. All the people in the collaboration co-op could really easily articulate what we were doing. And it's such a simple thing when you've got a good vision and principles that are pretty undeniable to stick to those. So that's the first lesson. I won't go through all the bullet points on the right. They're just that in a bit more detail. And if Armajit wanted to share this later, she's welcome to. They also saw the value in our intermediary that was navigated. That was Nick Alexander and his team. they were agnostic in some ways to the process, and they'd come from Pukekohe in Auckland, but they were very sophisticated in terms of project management, building relationships, and if anyone in this whole process probably took the biggest battering, it was Nick himself. He had an incredible ability to just stick to what he had been told we wanted to do. So he was upholding our vision and principles at times in opposition to some of those within the kaupapa. That took a lot of bravery on his behalf, and I think he was pretty exhausted after the 3 years. But having someone outside of your current organisations being the relationship builder, the mediator, the facilitator, and being able to have some hard conversations with people without it being vested in that they had no health contract, no day-to-day work in the area was incredibly powerful. So we have to engage with loss. I mentioned that. I think that letting go. So whether it's your loss of power, your autonomy, your resource, your voice, or knowledge, something along the way, everyone in that room was realizing that if we were going to move to a place where whānau mattered and we were going to go back to just communities to find out what they wanted most, then that was going to be different, and it was going to mean change, and it would often mean some loss or perceived loss in the level of importance of themselves. I said several times that if I lost my job because people could do things better than me, go for it. It's not about me. None of this was about me. It was about doing better for those we serve. And that still remains a problem, because for some people, that's not what they still perceive. Relationships. So this is all about relationships. So Paul I've mentioned, or will mention, culture eating strategy. This is to do with the culture of your relationships, the way you work with each other. No amount of writing all this down on paper is going to make the slightest bit of difference if you haven't got the relationship with each other is working properly. And again, this is some of that I mentioned is about readiness, so that we're having to go back at times to find individuals and groups that weren't quite ready to move. And once people dig their toes in, or they feel that they're being threatened, then they have the ability to actually completely unrail things at times. So you have to sometimes go back and take a pause and listen respectfully and engage and find out what it is that they don't quite right, and then start moving again. It was a bit of a tightrope walk at times, and it did lead at times to direct challenges of people's views, because sometimes people might have stopped, but not for a reason that can be defended pretty easily. And again, we did have a continuous change to some of the people that were on the kaupapa, just the way things move and health of people taking up new roles. So expect, if you're doing this, that you might have people that come in that have to be brought up to speed, but also people might come in that bring fresh eyes and fresh views and make the thing even richer than you initially think it would be. And we had with Navigator a meticulous process. It seems sort of counterintuitive when we're talking about something that's so complex and ambiguous and almost from the heart or philosophical, but having good documentation and protocols and planning was actually an important part of how we went back if things were coming off the rails, to review previous minutes, previous decisions, and then move forward. We did it symbolically. So Nick would come to a meeting with a pile of A3 sheets and plonk them on the table, and it was a symbol of how far we'd gone, how much work we'd done, how much agreement we'd had, and how aligned we were. So at any point where we felt we were under pressure or stress from things in the past, we could either refer to it or just recognize that that was done and dusted, and we were moving in the positive forward direction. So at the time, and this is pretty unique and challenging what we did, we were pretty much doing this in a vacuum. There wasn't a health and disability review. There wasn't anyone in Wellington supporting us. There wasn't actually any support pretty much anywhere. We just realized once we started, it was the right thing to do. It's interesting now looking at what's going on though with Y2575 and the Health and Disability Review, how aligned this is to what we should be doing, having community and whānau-led care with a backbone organisation supporting what people want in their own communities. As I've gone through this, I mean, you would have seen quite a few things. You think, whoa, that looks like a lot of hard work. This is hard work. We made it much harder than it needed to be, though, because we were doing this without any prior knowledge of the paradoxes and how difficult it would be. So just got to be aware that with those things I've talked to you about it, you can make this less uncomfortable than we made it. So I'm going to end just with one little thing. This is a little plug from me and some of my friends up here in Northland about maybe how this can be done in a way that from the start you've got those visions and principles I mentioned. But if we flip this and go, what is it that people actually want? Where are the pain points? Where in their life would you like to be supported for well-being? You can find that in a community probably immediately. There's some things in on this little diagram where you just put your X where things are tough for you, where you might want to focus some stuff, talking to communities where they want care and support to be given. I use this in my own practice to talk to my patients around what they want me to focus on. It's a very simple way of viewing it. I think then you, at a community level, would have an idea of what people would like, where they want you to help them, where you want to co-create and co-support each other, and then work back to the structure and agency that makes that happen. So much of health at the moment is to do with top tables and then middle level organizations without actually flipping this right around the other way and working back from the story of the people that we actually are meant to be supporting, serving and caring for. And it looks pretty simple, but it is pretty simple. It's no harder than actually using some imagination, using your ability to get up in the morning and think, well, business as usual is failing. Is there something else we could be doing that would make me as a provider's well-being better and those I look after better? And I don't think that's at all difficult in terms of philosophy. It's just difficult because we've got a way of doing things that isn't really working. So that's my little presentation. I hope you haven't stressed you out too much thinking what the future holds. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And last week, when Dominique and I had the chance or when I had the chance and then Dominique to hear and learn from your work, we were just really inspired by your lessons and success. So thank you so much for sharing that with everybody.
Welcome.
And a lot of those lessons, if we go back to the things you all mentioned earlier, like the power struggles and ego dominating and communication and all those other things, a lot of the lessons are ones that address those things, which is great. So thank you for that. Last week, what we had shared was 3 lessons that come from our work overall about collective impact. The first is that clear strategy engages commitment, that the more focused and clear the strategy is, the easier it is to organize people to get work done, and the clearer people are on what needs to happen. The second is that the form follows function, that when you know what you're trying to do, then you can figure out who all needs to do what. And that too often people build the work around who's at the table instead of determining what's the work that needs to happen and who needs to be at our table to do that. And so it kind of is something that flows. And the third is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's a famous quote from a well-known business guru in the United States, Peter Drucker, but it's something that we found very true. And again, if you look at all the things you mentioned earlier that make teams don't work well, it's all about culture. And so you can have a great plan, a great strategy, all the right committees, but if you don't build a culture that's inclusive, that's collaborative, that has some level of accountability for people making commitments and following up on them, that is a culture that supports learning, that supports equity, that supports engagement. If you don't have those things in your culture, that's where these things hit a wall. And as we listen to Andrew's presentation today, I was reflecting on some of those lessons within that context, and initially talking about the importance of having that clear result and that North Star that the group created. It's from the group. It's not created by one person, or when it's created by the group, and everyone can articulate, and having that clarity about the journey, the protocols, and the work plan that give people a clear line of sight to move forward. The importance of having that honest broker and facilitator for the group that we call a backbone, to kind of make sure that there's a trusted person kind of facilitating the work. I love the point about meeting people where they are and moving when the readiness is there. I'm someone who tends to move really fast, and I'm kind of a head in the clouds person, and I go really far, and I often have to come back and meet people where they are. The core group will change over time. That, again, if the group creates a plan, then there's a plan. You look who's needed now based on what the plan is, and it changes over time. And finally, lots of stuff on culture, the holding paradox and tensions. We always say if half the group thinks we're moving too fast and half thinks we're moving too slow, we're probably moving the right speed, right? And the job of the facilitator is not to solve for it, but just to hold that, know that everyone's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but a certain amount of discomfort actually makes the group work well. Spending as much time on relationships, a meticulous process, really helps with that ambiguity and complexity. Again, like we always say a meeting should have a culture that when I come to the meeting for this group, it works the same way every time. And it's very inclusive and represents and reflects the values we have. So when I'm at those meetings, I know it's different than all the boring committee meetings I go to everywhere else, and I have a sense of how it works. Addressing competing interests and dealing with both trust and conflict. We all always talk about the idea that the absence of conflict is not a positive measure of collaboration. It often means that we're going to the parking lot after the meeting and complaining about everything there. And the thing is, how do you build the relationships of trust where the parking lot conversations can come into the room, where you can debate and disagree over ideas, where you can hold each other accountable, where you can give each other feedback. And when you've done that, then you've built trust. And so trust often has a certain amount of conflict. It's a paradox, but it's true. Dominique, we kind of came up with this list together, but I'd love to hear also some of your reflections on Andrew's presentation.
So I think what came, and Paul, this is brilliant what you just shared, but I think, Andrew, what really resonated with me, and it was something that you shared at the beginning, is that this work is difficult. And we should move into the work expecting that it's difficult and not that it's going to unfold with ease. But if we, again, build our muscle around some of these things, around difficult conversations, around collaboration, on dealing with ambiguity and complexity, that at least we go into it understanding that that's what's needed. It makes it easier. It's much more difficult when you go into it thinking it's going to be a linear, clear, bump-free road, and then are hit with what it really is. And Paul, I'm putting the questions into the chat. Are you ready for them?
I think Kirsten is setting up the breakout rooms. Are those in progress?
Sure are. Any second, I'm going to send people to breakout rooms if you guys are ready.
Great. So just hold on. So the questions, so what we want to do is we're going to break you up into conversations for about 15 minutes. And we'd like you to think about what's your experience in terms of coalitions with some of these same lessons. What have been the most important tools or practices you have found helpful in helping a team work better together? And what questions are you holding for us? And so when we come back, we want to hear from you. And if you're here last week, you know that we'll call on you if you don't say anything. We'll call on random people, even if their video's off. And but we'd like you to spend 15 minutes with each other, and then we'll spend some time with you. And then we'll enter part 2, where we're going to hear from Meryl and Claudia about consumer engagement. So enjoy our breakouts, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes.
Recorded.
So who wants to share any insights, ahas, questions that you had inside your discussion? And if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute. I want to hear all of you, but not at one time. So who has insights, questions like last time? You guys know what my favorite thing to do, Craig, is to call on people. It's my favorite thing to do. Craig Watson, hey there, how you doing?
Yeah, hey.
Your conversation.
We had a really good discussion around getting the right voices, and also the kind of counterbalance of that is to get the work done, is to really ensure that the perspectives or the voices are stepping up and are contributing. And the hardest thing we often find is in that collective environment is actually having those critical conversations either with that person or with the entity they represent, because that's really tough to do. But if you want to get the work done, you need to have the right people at the right time.
That's awesome, Craig. Thank you. Linda Jo. Hi, Linda Jo.
Hi, Dominique. Hi, everyone. Well, we had a very rich discussion, and Andrew was sort of taking notes, so I wasn't. But the quick sort of précis that I can probably give is that we sort of like talked about how it is so important to get the right people around the right tables and to engage with the right leaders in the communities, so that we can really understand what is required, and like really just getting out to the coalface and seeing what the real problems are, rather than sitting in corporate offices and making sort of agendas which probably don't really fit that well.
Mm-hmm. We talked last week about having both the content expertise and the context expertise, and you need both. You need people with the real lived experience that are informing our strategies and programs, and you need content experts too. So thank you, Linda Jo, for sharing. Hey, Jess Morgan French. I really just liked your name. So I'm like, that's the next person I'm going to call on.
Kia ora. So we had a really good discussion. We talked a lot around the culture, and specifically probably culture and general practice, and how that impacts performance and strategy and the way that we lead forward. And then we got sidetracked with discussions around the health reform and the different culture that are kind of coming out in different organizations at this time. And then we got sidetracked even more and started talking about kind of different inequities across our system, and really looking into the rural systems as well, and how we can kind of improve them. So we potentially didn't follow the rules, but we had really good, authentic conversation, and it was really enlightening and empowering, which was good.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. And I see Lisa in the chat says trust is huge, and you also discussed respect. It sounds like a lot of folks were talking about really the people and the culture that we need to have in place in order to advance this work. So often we're focused on the work and getting it done, but the people and the people inside of the process are equally, if not more important, to making sure that we're successful. Does anybody have any questions or last or final thoughts? I won't call on anybody else before we move on. I'm really excited to hear from Merle and Claudia. So, but if there are any questions that came up, Andrew, hey, I see your hand.
Thank you. I'll take it down at the end of the question. Just as far as that final question about any challenges or questions that are holding us back, there were two that came up, one that we discussed in the group and one that we didn't quite have enough time for. But one was the issue about balancing a business model, a business paradigm with a collaborative framework where you're having to engage with potentially competing organizations in the same environment. And that does create some challenges and some questions about how best to conduct yourself in a trustworthy way when you're sharing intellectual property processes and systems that you've invested quite heavily in. And the other question was, and I encounter this as a scientist and as a physician a lot from my colleagues, and it's a reasonable question, is does it actually work? Where's the data to show that the outcomes actually are there to justify the level of investment and resource that's allocated to this? Because oftentimes we'll find that things sound like a really good idea, the concept is excellent, but through the process of application, there may not be the rigorous analysis and demonstration of the positive outcomes that you're looking for. And I think that question is an important one to maximize engagement across the sector. Thank you.
No, those are great, Andrew. And I may have come to Paul because he talks about this all the time. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for all of that. And I would say that one is that a collective impact approach is not a model. It's an approach. It's a way of organizing work together. But what we found is that when people align well using these tools and have a clear result and strategies that are at the right level to move them, and by right level, I mean are big enough in terms of the scale or size of the work and the complexity of it, we've seen a lot of communities move population level results, whether it's a community that reduced teen pregnancy by 70% or increased third grade reading scores by 20 points, but we've seen people actually move real population level results or larger system changes. And so when we've at the forum done 2 studies now where we looked at more than 20 communities that move population results, we find that these practices really still hold and are the ones that can move that. Now, it does take a lot of hard work. And I think a lot of people get close, but back off as it gets into the harder work. And that's why culture is so important. That clear direction and that culture are so important. And because you're going to face difficulty. And I think a lot of times people start doing it and they feel good. And then they start backing off from the stuff that made them successful early on. And then when it gets hard, they have no foundation. That trust and relationship building is there. So when you hit those hard points a few years in, you've got the relationships and trust to work through them. And I think too often people ignore that and then they get stuck. Any other questions or comments before we move forward? Great, thanks, Andrew, for the thumb up. We like those. And I think as we talk about getting the right people at the right tables and having that kind of lived and learned expertise, how important both are in authentic conversations and all of this, that, last week, Dominique and I talked about community engagement, and we talked about being purposeful, being clear about why engaging community is essential to creating change. We also talked about being asset-based and really understanding what individuals and community have and starting from there. And then the third was we talked about kind of how we share power and build power in community as we do our work. And really, again, seeing community and consumer engagement not as a place to get some feedback on stuff, but really as full partners and learning to do work with community instead of to or for community. And so we're very excited to kind of hand this part of the agenda over to Meryl and Claudia, who Meryl is on the HCH Collaborative Governance Group and works with Health Navigators as a consumer rep. And Claudia is also a Health Navigator consumer and supporting the HCH Collaborative. And I'll let them share more. And we're excited to invite you both to share it. I know that Dominique and I on Thursday are very excited to hear your presentation on Friday. So.
Kia ora, Paul. Tēnā koutou katoa ko koutou e noho mai nei ki te whakarongo I ngā kōrero. Hey, welcome to everybody that is sitting and listening. Claudia and I are pleased to present to you this morning. However, I am aware that quite a few of the things that we are going to be sharing are very similar. So I have actually moved part of my kōrero aside because it comes up again through Claudia's. However, the first thing I might like to mention, because we spoke about relationships, the relationship with each other, even with the kaupapa, and then we're looking at the whole organization and outside. But for tātou te iwi Māori, for us as Māori people, who are we to you? Who am I? When I am sharing, I am coming from where? So what I want to introduce to you is whakawhanaungatanga. Call it waka whanaungatanga, haka whanaungatanga. It is about creating or an action that is caused through relationship. For us as Māori, we are looking to not only implement and share what whanaungatanga is, but we are looking to touch the mauri within. That is the spark that will motivate, energize, and the well-being grows from there. Mel's starting here, but I am going to hand this over to Claudia, and towards the end, we can conclude again about Māori being in the consumer role or space. Kia ora, Claudia.
Kia ora, Mel. Thank you so much. And I just want to acknowledge that I've been entrusted to make sure that I cover the kōrero for both of us. And that's a huge trust for me. So thank you, my friend. And there's a lot in this. So bear with me, guys, because I tried to make it smaller. Of course, trying to condense something that's all inclusive is incredibly difficult. So I've tried to keep it as brief as I can, but let's go. Okay. Let's go. So Tihe Māori Ora, this is my Māori creation and engagement story. We are an oral culture, not a written culture. So if you want to engage us and engage with us, we want the story. Come on my journey. I'm Ngāpui Nui Tonu and Te Rarawa tribes. I'm disconnected urban Māori, so I'm still learning about my whakapapa, but I've been blessed to have extensive experience on 2 of the 3 spectrums I've outlined further on. You must understand who I am in order to understand how to engage with me and engage me. I invite you into my world. This is a brief overview, but I think a beautiful description of how Te Ao Māori works. There is no separation that we experience in what I call the European model. Everything feeds everything, everything informs everything. And in the middle there, you have whakapapa and whānau, so the family is there, and in the center of that family will be each individual. So the next slide is the Te Wheki model of care. It was written by an incredible woman called Dr. Rangi Maria Rose Perry. She introduced kohanga reo to this country. She was very holistic in her thinking. Basically, the way I had it described to me is that the 8 tentacles of well-being are the well-being determinants for Māori. As long as each one of those is taken care of, everyone will experience well-being. The head is the whānau or the family, but the eyes are the individual and the lens that the whānau is seeing through. So what is going on, what the individual perceives will be experienced by the whānau, and collectively they make a decision to move the tentacle of well-being. Māori identity. Here we are going into who Māori are. These are just a few background facts around colonisation and how that has affected Māori identity. Takatapui are our rainbow community. And in history, they were actually prized in our culture. So our traditional identities have been removed Te Ao Māori is connected and communal, whereas European models are very nuclear and specialised. So this is just a little brief history of colonisation and how that's affected identity. These are our universal human truths that I experience as a Māori. I want a conversation, not an instruction. And the best conversations that I have make me feel a certain way. So, you know, I've included a couple of examples there, but even though I may not remember your words, I will always remember how you made me feel in that conversation. And that is what Maori is. And my world, because I experience my world, I don't live in it. And I believe that's true for Maori, but also for other people. Maori experience. So how Maori experience the world, we have the standard 5 senses and we have Maori. And what I've done is I've tried to give you an example of how Maori might be experienced by other people. But the most important thing to remember about Maori is that the first thing we do as Maori is when we exchange hongi, which is the pressing of noses. We are exchanging the life force or the Maori of ourselves and our ancestors with you and your ancestors. And immediately when we've agreed to hongi, we've created a safe space. This is going to be challenging for some people, but it is what I believe. The bias by Māori against Māori has created what I believe is 3 main spectrums of Māori existence here in Aotearoa. Those spectrums are here. I've outlined them so that you can inform yourselves about which Māori population you're intending to serve. The first spectrum is the really good Māori. Now they've identified success and strived for it and achieved it in the European model. They're quite nuclear in their nature and they have a network of feedback avenues, but their privilege and judgment of other Māori will dictate the feedback that you receive. The second spectrum is the disconnected urban Māori, and they're quite flexible in their approach, but they spend a lot of their time seeking to belong because they essentially don't feel that they belong anywhere. They don't fit in settings, they don't fit in back home. Because they have a flexible approach, their engagement depends on the current circumstance going on for them, but you'll get a wider range of feedback because they have a wider range of experience. The challenged Māori. Now they're very communal because they have very little resource. So they're quite used to sharing. Vulnerable lifestyles, massive complexity. The feedback avenues that you can access here are possibly available where whānau are already engaging, but survival is relentless. And because it consumes all of their time, you're actually asking them to put aside time when their whole life is about surviving. So, you know, these are things that I think you need to be aware of. But as acute users of our support services, this feedback is critical and it's also the hardest to access. So this is the part where we go on the journey of creating consumer engagement in a Māori context. And in our creation stories, te kore kore is the void of possibility, the dark, and moves right through the stages until we get to tihe Māori ora, and that is the breath of life. This was kindly given to me with permission by Taina Pirapi, and I strongly encourage you all to look at this work because she is incredible. So here we are in te kore kore, and what these are kind of examples of what I believe are the seeds that we want to put into that void to create the right possibility. Being very clear about mission statements, clear about why you're seeking engagement, and whether you're seeking engaged, and you know, touching on that, are you seeking engagement or are you trying to engage? Right, these are kind of questions that you ask here, and moving from this space, keep it in the front of your mind because what I believe that does is it helps clarify things moving forward, regardless of how the process unfolds. And it means that your communication will always be authentic and true. And I know that I will always commit to being authentic with that person too, right? Vulnerability begets vulnerability. Here we are in Te Pō. Now, Te Pō is where we start to grow. So if it was a pregnancy, this would be the part where the child is growing in the mother's womb. And this, these are some of the questions that I would think about asking at this developmental stage. So just a few examples to keep having that conversation, right? Again, here we are at ki te whai ao. And this is where the mother would be in labor. The seed would be breaking the ground. And again, it's a conversational kōrero. Ki te ao marama, the child's here, that the baby's here. And these, again, we're having a conversation. So I've just given you a few examples so that you can continue to think about how this conversation looks. And obviously this is where it's taken its first breath. So we can, keep the conversation rolling. Again, just a few slides about why I've given the reason the focus is about the kōrero. Just basically a synopsis of what we've covered earlier. Now, this is an example of a piece of work I developed called Mana Motahaki, which is actually about self-determined well-being. And the content that I've included here is about whānau empowerment, not what I call enablement. So this is how, in my world, whānau experience empowerment. So they're experiencing it with their senses. So we're hearing it. We're seeing it. So how would it look if they were experiencing empowerment? And again, how would it feel if I was experiencing empowerment? This is just a few things that I've noticed from a consumer personal journey as urban disconnected Māori and at times challenged Māori. I want you to experience me in my space. So if you want to engage with real me, find the space where I feel safe. I get extra labour requests from very well-meaning others seeking understanding, but only in as far as it supports their own work. This is something to just be mindful of, I think. I think it's important that someone, this needs to be noted in my world. Māori prefer face-to-face. The different spectrums will have different access requirements. And I believe that Te Ao Māori should inform all process design. I believe that these are the things that whānau would say if they were sitting here right now. So this is around trust. This is around how precious their time is. Their complexity is as unique as they are, and it can change daily. Seeing the individual that is the lens of the whānau head to access those tentacles of well-being is incredibly important. And recognise my strengths, because I believe that a lot of the models we work from in the European world are deficit-based. Te Ao Māori is strength-based. And these are just a couple of other thoughts that I had that actually I didn't really, I've looked at the slide many, many times, and I've never quite found another place to put it. And because this is actually my first presentation, I just put them on a slide at the end, so I didn't miss sharing them with you. And yeah, I hope that this has been a value add for some of you, and the slides are there to share, and if anybody wants to contact me, they can just touch base with Amaji. Kia ora, and thank you for listening.
Claudia, that was amazing. So what I'm going to do, as Claudia just said, this was her first presentation to more than one person. I'm going to ask everyone to come off of mute for just a moment and give her a round of applause. That was extraordinary. Everybody come off of mute and give Claudia a round of applause.
Well done, fantastic.
Outstanding.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
This is a clap.
Amazing.
Fantastic. This is a clap in sign language.
Thank you for sharing that.
Amazing, Claudia. Thank you so much for
Claudia,
giving.
can you end your screen share?
Of
There
course.
should be a button, great, and then we
Of
can
course.
go back to the group so you can see everybody. And then Amarjit, if you can move out of the spotlighting so we can bring the gallery back, that would be great. So we can see the group. But that was incredible. The first question is, will we get a copy of these slides, Claudia?
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful.
And,
Thank you.
And also happy to facilitate any direct questions around those slides. Happy to, anything that furthers a collective outcome is I'm happy to address. So please.
Wonderful. And while you've been presenting, the chat is lit up with positive comments and people excited to share the video and the materials with other people, and lots of wonderful comments. So let's open up to questions or reflections on let's start with any questions or follow up with Claudia and Meryl, and then if we can also, Andrew, Dominique, and I can come back in as needed or share some other perspectives, but would love to start with who has some questions or thoughts that they'd like to share with Claudia and Meryl. And again, you can take yourselves off of mute to do that. Great. Amarjit, you'll start us.
It's more of a comment as well, and there'll possibly be a question that comes out of it. But I first met Claudia, when was it? This couple of days ago. And Fire Mill had and Gary, our other consumer representative, had said, you must meet Claudia. And we spoke for 2 hours, and straight away it was, wow, we need to, you know, share the story, share the learning. And it was, yeah, I was blown away, Claudia. And I have lots of, and I know my team will be the same, lots of opportunity for yourself, Fire Mill, and Gary to be working with us to guide us on our way. Because I suppose if I was to frame a question, what advice would you give us to ensure that when we're creating collective, and in our sense of where the health reforms are going, a locality, what advice would you give us to ensure we get off on the right foot and make sure that we really get people to hear, feel and see? What would be, I know obviously there's a lot in your presentation, but just as we embark on these localities, how do we get that shift right from the start?
My experience and my instinct tells me that actually you're coming from a place where you have an understanding and a knowledge that is embedded and taught as clinicians, as a clinical environment. Throw all that out the window. Actually, if you want to shift yourselves first. Start with an open book. Start with an outcome, not a metric, not a goal, an outcome, and actually be prepared to allow that if you want to take that locality with you, their outcome is as important as yours. So first of all, ask them what their outcomes are. Then out of that, grow the mission statement. Because what I'm encountering in health a lot now is that we've got resources that we started developing 20 years ago. And now that we want consumer-centric design, we've got these square boxes, and what we try to do is shave off the sides and kind of squeeze it like this, and then make that square shaved side thing fit in a round consumer co-design hole. And it's like, actually what we need to do is throw that out, not throw the entire thing out, but understand that we need to bring it back through this process to make it truly consumer co-design. So that'd be my advice.
Cool. Kia ora, Claudia, thank you.
Kia ora, Amaji.
Great, thank you. Other questions or perspectives people have to share? And if no one speaks up, I'm going to turn Dominique loose.
Kia ora.
To call on people. Yeah, please.
Oh, kia ora. Mel here. I loved it, so thank you so much for sharing that. One of the questions I had was around, I loved your graphic for Te Ao Māori, where the kai te akitanga, kotahitanga, and all that impacted and wove through each other with the whakapapa and the whānau. Did you come up with that graphic, or is that a graphic that is out there as that we can share and use? Because I love simple things that beautifully shows it so simply, and I loved it.
Yeah, so are we talking about the Te Ao Māori graphic or the Tihiwa Māori ora?
The Te Ao Māori graphic.
Te Ao Māori. Now, I couldn't quote the source for that because it's one that I downloaded a long time ago, but I'm absolutely determined to make sure that I figure out who the source is before I share it, but I literally pulled it off the web because I find some of the graphics that they already use are quite confusing. So yeah, I can't give you the source at the moment, but by the time you get the slides, I promise I will.
The source is Google.
Yes.
Which is a source for a lot of my stuff. Other questions or comments on the presentation?
Paul, you know you can call on people too.
I know, but you're so much better at it. Oh, Dr. Kitagawa raised her hand, so let's go there. Hi.
Kia ora, Claudia.
Kia ora,
Thank you so much for sharing that. It was beautiful. I just wanted, it's not a question, it's a comment, just that I really appreciated, what did you call the challenged Maori, those three kind of definitions of Maori, where they're at.
Yeah.
I appreciated that. That's it's something I've kind of thought of in my head, was that they were, you know, each were in different spaces depending how connected or unconnected they were. But for you to put it in kind of a defined way was really, really nice for me to see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that because those have been my experiences and my observations, what concerns me about where we've been in health and what will dictate for me how successful we are moving forward under the reforms is we pay cultural advisors to sit inside health organizations. And I'm not saying that their intent isn't beautiful, but I can almost guarantee you that they sit in the really good Māori spectrum. Now, because their feedback is often, and of course it's a spectrum, often biased towards their experience and their experience of their whānau, you know, like the challenging ones that are difficult for them to be around, that will inform their feedback. And what I really want to invite, if we're going to create a Māori health authority, is that it be very representative of all three groups, because none are more or less valid than any of the others. But where is our feedback coming from that informs that? So it's most pivoted towards those who most require help, because everything's connected. What goes on for my whānau goes on for me. So I'm never going to be successful until my entire whānau is successful. And I think that mahi kind of helps inform that. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Maybe I have got a question out of that now. So if we as organizations are going to, some people use the word engage, and I kind of prefer the term embrace Māori in our co-design, how do we best ensure we're going to represent those three kind of different spaces that Māori are in? How do we ensure that we're talking to the right person?
Right. So my advice around that would be develop a different strategy to engage with the different spectrums. The thing is, for example, if we're dealing with challenge Māori, there's a very good chance that and I'm just going to generalize here, I'm sure you appreciate that it's an example. There'll be a mother with a number of children, most likely 2 or 3 different fathers. A couple of them will be involved in corrections. You know, she's probably got health conditions herself, struggles with getting through everything in a 15-minute GP appointment. Probably not going to invite them to a hui because actually they're a bit busy for that. But she's probably most likely already involved with whānau order. So that would be a good touch point for her if she feels safe there. You know, find out where they already are, go to them. Don't increase their burden by expecting them to come to you and the outcome for them is that there's a better health system for all. That goal is out there for them. What they need to do is experience the goal now. Success begets success. So if you give them little wins along the way, they'll remain engaged. And so, yeah, my advice to you would be go to them. Don't expect them to come to you because that's more heavy lifting and they're exhausted already, right? Whereas in the, for example, the really good Māori, there's a good chance that you can get through to them on some sort of professional body, some sort of networking thing. They'll already be members of those because they're proactive with their time. So how you engage the different spectrums will be dictated by who they are.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that we always talk about meeting people where they are in order to do that, but also in kind of classic community organizing around building power, it always begins with create early wins to help people define their interests and gain wins on their interests, because the more they feel empowered by that, the more they'll be willing to work on larger interests. And so really, really important there. Meryl, you handed things over to Claudia pretty quickly, but we don't want to let you off the hook because I know you've got a lot of perspective on these things too. I'd love just if you could give some reflection, you know, hearing the questions and things people have shared. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you as well on this topic. But you have to unmute first. There we go.
A helpful tip. Thank you.
I give that tip to 100 times a week, so it's all good.
Well, I think I did hand it over to Claudia pretty quick because I realized how it flowed on from everything else that was being said by yourself and Dominique. Even though in America, Andrew here, and as a GP, I loved the breakout rooms because it gave me an opportunity to hear some of the other questions that were there. But knowing the presentation that Claudia was going to give, it tickled inside of me because it helped, like a framework, filled the gaps that I think as Māori that we don't often get to expose or share in a way that is succinct. It's simple, it's straight to the point. And I believe that it actually embraced the kaupapa or the things we were speaking about today, where I knew the talk that was going to happen, yet I feel quite empowered by the comments and the responses of everybody else to know that the message that was going to be shared today, that truly we all came away with something. Consumer, professional, the GP, the nurses, the DHB, whoever else is listening. And so with the gratitude, Paul, that you and Dominique come with the collective collective impact, that for me hearing that, and as Māori, everybody coming together. It's okay that you don't agree, but be firm on your kaupapa. What is your focus? Does everybody know all the steps that each other was taking? I've really enjoyed today, and although I have watched the replay of the first webinar that happened, I can see where else this is leading, and comparable to our world, to our Māori, and what else is being shared. I feel quite confident that the way the professionals will now reach out, not only in their cultural groups or their collective impact groups or organizations, but they can see that there's a more gentle or tender way to do it without it feeling like, I need you here. I want you five to come and do this. We have heard today about how we share it. And it's wonderful because we've got it from both sides. I know that, and no offense to anyone, but in the past, even when I have felt to want to deliver something, I feel sad because it stands alone. But today we've been able to come around it as a whole for everybody to be able to look down and see each facet, face, understanding. I'm just very grateful because I think the collective impact has certainly made a difference today. So ngā mihi kia korua, ko koutou e noho ana kei runga i tēnā panel. Thank you very much. And kia rātou katoa e mātakitaki ana kia mātou. For everyone that is watching and listening, thank you for your input. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak, because I believe the consumer engagement, just like everybody else, is vital to the building up of whatever that kaupapa is. Thank you, Paul. Good morning, Claudia. If I had 3 thumbs, you'd get them. Thank you, Paul.
Lots of love in this space. Thank you so much. Andrew, wondering if you, hearing from Claudia, Meryl, if there's any other reflections you have, just kind of connecting back to your lessons and experience with what you heard.
It just fires me up some more, both of you. I mean, some of us, we seem to overcomplicate in some ways, that we're hearing that stories matter, that actually the most important thing is to find out what's going on and listen to that and do something with it. So that little wheel thing I showed you, which is one way of starting that conversation, is super simple. You know, if your well-being's not going as well as you'd like, where are your pain points and how can I help you? We at the Coalface get this all day, every day, and we've got structures behind us that don't let us do the right thing. I'm perpetually frustrated in my work not to do the screamingly obvious, to actually do the stuff that matters, that we're not asking the right questions, and we're not allowed to because we haven't got structures behind that make it easy to do. And I go home frustrated, and the people I'm meant to be engaging with feel disengaged. I don't see how we made that so hard. When I show that wheel to people, they'll say, oh, Andrew, you're going to open a can of worms. So I want to open that can of worms right up. I want to find out what could be done when people tell me that they've got no car in the fridge or no rent to pay or living in a car or whatever else they tell me. How can I help you? No door's the wrong door. Tell me, you know, anywhere you go, it's a pharmacist or a GP or a dental nurse or a whānau ora provider, Māori provider, we should all be looking at that wellbeing wheel and working back from what we're hearing, not the other way around. We're always top heavy and coming down the other side. And that's just common sense. And dare I say, being completely self-interested, I'm quite interested in my own well-being. When I go home at the end of the day and I've not had a good day because I've not looked after people properly, because I'm not allowed to care for them, not healthcare, but actual care, then I feel really frustrated. So I would quite like to have a system where I feel I'm caring for people in a proper sense of listening and engaging, and then work my way back through a system that makes that easy to do, the right thing to do. And I don't see, it's complicated, I think, by a lack of imagination. We were talking in our group a little bit about Toyota lean model. You know, Toyota executives spend 80% of their day on the shop floor. They're out on the factory floor. So if our people in the Ministry of Health and our people in these middle level organisations spend 80% of the time out of their office and in communities, walking around, talking to people, seeing what life was like, I bet you there'd be a whole lot of different ways of doing things, but that's not how it's done. Decision makers sit in places unconnected to communities and unconnected to whānau and unconnected to people. If they will flip themselves out of the office and walk around or spend a day in doing my job or whānau ora job or Māori provided job, bet you they'd have a different worldview and they'd understand what that wheel was about and probably would find to get a big shift in their imagination and their ability to get things done. So, sorry, it sounds like a rant, but I'm so pleased to hear what Claudia and Mel had to say because it resonates. It's completely the right stuff.
Awesome,
Great, thank you so
Andrew.
much. Thank you so much. What a treat hearing from all of you. And I can tell, as I said in the chat and from the smiles and the occasional thumb up emojis, that a lot of this is resonating with the audience. Any other questions or comments people would like to share before we wrap up? Really, really appreciating the learning from all of you and the experience. Is that a hand up, May?
Yeah, it is.
Great.
Hand up, not a handout. Anyway, hey, I just wanted to say, just wanted to tautoko you, Claudia, from Te Taitokoro, and Mel, Whaia Mel, for your amazing work. And I just love that Whaia Mel handed it over. That's beautiful. That's an example of good leadership right there. I just wanted to talk to you about tautua in the Pacific world. It's about servant leadership, and I think that's one of the things that's really strong with our Pacific peoples, is that like we serve our people, all of us. When you're leaders, you serve your people, and that comes down to like whānau and community. So we might have these wonderful roles, we might be doing these. We've been placed in these places, or we applied for a job and got a good job, or to be making money or have a role on a board or whatever, but really we're only there at the grace of our people, really, and that's what we're there for, and that's who we serve. And so what Andrew said about we should take a walk around in the community, I just think of the people that I work alongside who are part of the community, and they don't do any of their work for themselves. It's always about their community, about their whānau. So it's a bit like Avatar, I See You, the movie, and the humanity, coming back to keeping it real. So we need to always keep it real in everything that we do. Like if I'm thinking about the consumer work that I do, when I go along to Mahitahi, because I'm on the Community Voices Council there, Andrew. So that was good to hear from you. But I'm thinking about my mum, I'm thinking about my brother, I'm thinking about my kids, I think about myself, I think about my neighbour down the road, the old lady who doesn't get any help, the friends who nearly got kicked out of their house. Those are all the people that I'm thinking about when I go there. So I never go there on my own.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, please.
I just want to say that again, this sounds very brutal, but what I see there is the effect of colonization, because what happens is people go into those jobs that they've worked hard to get to, and they're subscribing to that European model of success. And so what happens is, although I started out with a really cool kaupapa, by the time I got to this point in my journey, I'm actually much more worried about keeping my job and my paycheck than I am about my original mission statement coming right through my authentic kōrero and being about the people I serve and my whānau, and not about my job. And so what happens is the mission statement falls away, and that colonist ideal becomes more important. And that's where you see the disengagement of people in our spaces, I think, personally.
Thank you, Claudia, for that insight, and thank you, May. I'm going to hand it over to Amarji to start closing us out. I really appreciate everyone staying with us through this whole time. and hope you learned a lot. I know that Dominique and I especially also enjoyed hearing from all of you. And just give Dominique a moment just also to say farewell from the US before we hand it back to MRG.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you, Claudia and Merle and Andrew. Your presentation brought up in me a lot of insights and questions, and I will be reaching out. So thank you again. Margit?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Kia ora. Thank you to everyone that has participated this morning. It really has been great korero and great conversation. And as much as we're not face to face, there's still a connection there. You still feel the vibe. The first thing Dominique said when she met Claudia and Merle was, I feel the connection, I feel the energy. And we, luckily can still get that via Zoom, but you still can't be face to face. So yes, thank you to our presenters. Andrew, as our clinical lead, the Healthcare Home Collaborative, you never cease to amaze us in terms of the time you give us. When you're a busy GP and lots going on. And by Mill, without your being at the helm in terms of our healthcare home model of care enhancement, we would not have got to where we got in terms of being truly authentic. So, and as I said, I just met Claudia and thought this lady's going to move mountains. So yeah, really great to have that connection. Paul and Dominique, we will obviously stay connected. I know this third webinar is in the evening, so it doesn't really allow for that participation, but we'll stay connected, and we absolutely appreciate everything that you bring in terms of that collective impact approach to support us in our work. And we know that there's so much open source tools, templates that we're working through as well to share with our networks to say, hey, let's not reinvent the wheel. And that's pretty much the core purpose of the Healthcare Home Collaborative, is to help people and support people not to reinvent. And I know that Kirsten is very much on the call today, behind the scenes, making this work. So thank you, Kirsten. Next time, Kirsten will be hosting, and she's up for that. And Jess White, I know my colleague, is also in the audience. So I'm just very grateful. And on that note, I think Via Merle, are you happy to close us out for Karakia?
I am.
Thank you.
Kia ora mai koutou katoa nei te wā whakamutunga. As we've come to the end of our meeting, anei tētahi atu karakia. I will close with the closing prayer. He inoi tātou. Kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti. Me te aroha o te atua. Me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Hei awhina. Hei tohu tohu ia mata katoa. Ake tonu ake. Amen. Please, everybody, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us all. Kia pai te rā. Awesome, Claudia.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.